Cleansing the Doors of Perception by Huston Smith. Chapter 2. Do Drugs Have Religious Import? For several years following my initiation, the entheogens were the center of my reflective and social life. Reflectively, to become overnight a visionary, one who not merely believes in the existence of a more momentous world than this one, but one who has actually visited it, was no small matter. How could what felt like an epochal change in my life have been crowded into a few hours and occasioned by a chemical? I knew how my MIT colleagues, Hans Lucas Tuber, its renowned experimental psychologist, and its equally legendary professor of microbiology, Jerome Letvin, would answer that question. The mescaline had scrambled the synapses in the nerve connections of my brain, creating irregular associations between the centers for vision, alarm, euphoria, and excitement, etc., etc. We get the idea. I was not persuaded. Still, if chemistry does not tell the whole story, what is that story? And what part do chemicals replacing angels as divine intermediaries play in it? Questions like these assaulted me with an urgency that reconstructed my social life. Family and friends remained in place, but beyond those, I sought out associates who shared my compulsion to talk about and to understand our shared secret. This is the stuff of which churches are made, and within the Harvard Project, an ad hoc church emerged. Its glue was our resistance to epiphenomenal reductionistic explanations of our revelations, and our certainty, equal to that of Huxley, Hoffman, Wasson, and William James, the giants in whose footsteps we thought of ourselves as walking, that it was impossible to close our accounts with reality without taking these revelations into consideration. What to make of the entheogens was the question, and we lived for the times when, like Socrates and his friends, we could hang out together to talk. The Harvard Project was hospitable, open-minded. It wanted to explore the effects of psychoactive chemicals in all promising directions. So our church in quotes, had its blessing and benefactions. Once every month or so we gathered to take our sacramental in a vaguely ritualistic context. Incense, candles, favorite poems, passages from sacred texts, and spontaneous inputs in the style of Quaker meetings. In between those services in quotes, we gathered to talk philosophically. We were but one satellite in Leary's project, which served as an umbrella under which those of its subjects who wanted to follow up on their experiences clustered and networked. An organization sprung up, the International Federation for Eternal Freedom, which for 10 years published a journal, the Psychedelic Review. It attracted some notable contributors, among them Robert Graves, Aldous Huxley, Albert Hoffman, and Gordon Wasson. Lisa Biberman and Peter John, who went on to become a Methodist minister, deserve to be mentioned for holding our church together without pay or public recognition. They gave virtually their full time to it. Readers of this book may recognize the names of several other members of our group for the parts that they played in history of entheogens. Walter Houston Clark, professor of psychology, of religion at Andover Newton Theology Seminar, became the most ardent crusader for the substances, arguing that they were the only things in sight that could restore the experiential component to the mainstream churches, without which they would not survive. Walter Pankes, P-A-H-N-K-E, Walter Pankey, Good Friday experiment, is the subject of Chapter 7 of this book. It's difficult to imagine how the history of the entheogens might have been different had he not died in a scuba diving accident, for he brought to his serious involvement with mysticism the scientific training of a medical doctor and his intention to devote his career to studying the resources of chemicals for religion. Paul Lee, who at the time was Paul Tillich's teaching assistant at Harvard, went on to teach philosophy at the University of California, Santa Cruz, before leaving academia to devote himself fully to studying herbs. The essay that follows sets out the conclusions I reached about the entheogens in the course of 3 years that I was involved with a Harvard project titled, "Do Drugs Have Religious Import?" It appeared in the October 1, 1964 issue, the Journal of Philosophy. I am told that it has been anthologized more times than any other article in that journal, over 20 times to date. I have made only a few minor alterations to clarify points that might otherwise be obscure. Until 6 months ago, if I had picked up the phone in the Cambridge area and dialed KISSBIG, Kiss Big, a voice would answer, if, IF-IF. These were coincidences. Kiss Big happened to be the letter equivalents of an arbitrarily assigned telephone number, and IF represented the initials of the organization with the improbable name of International Federation for Internal Freedom. But the coincidences were opposite to the point of being poetic. Kiss Big caught the euphoric, manic, life-embracing attitude that characterized this most publicized of the organizations formed to explore the newly synthesized conscious-changing substances. And the organization itself was surely one of the iffiest phenomena to appear on our social and intellectual scene in some time. It produced the first firings in Harvard's history of professors, Timothy Leary and his associate Richard Alpert, and an ensuing ultimatum to Leary to get out of Mexico in 5 days, and also the miracle of Marsh Chapel, M-A-R-S-H Chapel, in which during 2.5-hour Good Service Friday, 15 theological students and professors ingested psilocybin and were visited by what they generally reported to be the deepest religious experiences of their lives. Despite the last of these phenomena and its numerous, if less dramatic, parallels, students of religion appear to be dismissing the psychedelic drugs that have sprung up to our attention in the 60s as having little religious relevance. The position taken in one of the most forward-looking volumes of theological essays to have appeared in recent years, Soundings, edited by A.R. Vidler, V-I-D-L-E-R, accepts R.C. Zahner's mysticism, sacred and profane. And I'll spell Zahner's name. Z-A-E-H-N-E-R. Zahner's mysticism, sacred and profane, as having fully examined and refuted the religious claims for mescaline which Aldous Huxley sketched in The Doors of Perception. This closing of the case strikes me as premature, for it looks as if the drugs have light to throw on the history of religion, the phenomenology of religion, the philosophy of religion, and religious life itself. Cleansing the Doors of Perception by Huston Smith. Chapter 2. Drugs and Religion Viewed Historically. In their trial and error, life explorations, people almost everywhere have stumbled upon the connections between vegetables, eaten or brewed, and actions, in brackets, yogic breathing exercises, fast, whirling dervish dances, self-flagellations, close brackets, that induce dramatic alterations in consciousness. From psychopharmacological standpoints, we now understand these states to be the products of changes in brain chemistry. From the sociological perspective, we see that they tend to be connected in some way with religion. If we discount the wine used in Christian communion services, the instances closest to us in time and space are the Ph.D. sacrament of the Native American Church and Mexico's 2,000-year-old tradition of using sacred mushrooms, the latter rendered in Aztec as God's flesh, a striking parallel to the body of our Lord in the Christian Eucharist. Further away are the soma of the Hindus, the hyoma, Haoma, and hemp of the Zoroastrians. Dionysius, the Greek who everywhere taught men the culture of the vine and the mysteries of his worship, and everywhere was accepted as a god. The Benzoin, Benzzoin, of Southeast Asia, Zen's tea, whose fifth cup purifies and whose sixth calls to the realms of the immortals. The Pituri, Pituri, of the Australian Aborigines, and probably the mystic Kykeon, Kykeon, that was drunk at the climactic close of the sixth day of the Eleusinian mysteries. I don't know how to pronounce that word. There is no need to extend the list, as a reasonably complete account is given in Philip de Felice's comprehensive study of this subject entitled Poisons, Sacres, Inverses, and Divines. Poisons, Sacres, Ivresses, Divines. More interesting than the fact that conscious-changing devices have been linked with religion is the possibility that they may actually have initiated many of the religious perspectives which, taking root in history, continued after their entheogenic origins were forgotten. Okay. Bergson saw the first movement of Hindus and Greeks towards dynamic religion as associated with the divine rapture found in intoxicating beverages, and more recently, Robert Graves, Gordon Wasson, and Alan Watts have suggested that most religions have arisen from such chemically induced theophanies. Mary Barnard is the most explicit proponent of this thesis. Which was more likely to happen first, she asks, the spontaneously generated idea of an afterlife in which the disembodied soul, liberated from the restrictions of time and space, experiences eternal bliss, or the accidental discovery of hallucinogenic plants that give a sense of euphoria, dislocate the center of consciousness, and distort time and space, making them balloon outward in greatly expanded vistas. Her own answer is that the latter experience might have had the most explosive effect on the largely dormant minds of men, causing them to think of things they had never thought of before. Thus, if you like, is direct revelation. Her use of the subjective might renders this formulation of her answer equivocal, but she concludes her essay on a note that is categorical. open quote, looking at the matter coldly, unintoxicated, and unentranced, I am willing to prophesy that 50 theobotanists working for 50 years would make the current theories concerning the origins of much mythology and theology as out of date as pre-Copernican astronomy. End of quote. Oh, that's great. Let me read that quote again. That seems important. Looking at the matter coldly, unintoxicated, and unentranced, I am willing to prophesy that 50 theobotanists working for 50 years would make the current theories concerning the origins of much mythology and theology as out of date as pre-Copernican astronomy. This is an important hypothesis, one which must surely engage the attention of historians of religion for some time to come. But, as I am content here to forego prophecy and limit myself to the points where the drugs surface in serious religious study, I shall not pursue Ms. Barnard's thesis. Having tagged what appears to be the crux of the historical question, namely the extent to which drugs not merely duplicate or simulate theological sponsored experiences, but generate or shape theologies themselves, I turn to phenomenology. Okay. So this next section is entitled Drugs and Religion, Viewed Phenomenologically. All right. Phenomenology attempts a careful description of human experience. The question that drugs pose for the phenomenology of religion, therefore, is whether the experiences they induce differ from religious experiences reached without them, and if so, how. Even the Bible notes that substance-altered psychic states bear some resemblance to religious ones. Peter had to appeal to a circumstantial point, the early hour of the day, to defend those who were caught up in the Pentecostal experience against the charge that they were merely drunk. These men are not drunk, as you suppose, since it is only the third hour of the day. And Paul initiates the comparison when he admonishes the Ephesians not to get drunk with wine, but to be filled with the Spirit. Are such comparisons, which have counterparts in virtually every religion, superficial? How far can they be pushed? Not all the way. Students of religion have thus far insisted. With respect to the new drugs, Professor R.C. Zahner, Zaehner, has drawn the line emphatically. And here's a quote from him. The importance of Huxley's Doors of Perception, he writes, is that in it, the author clearly makes the claim that what he experienced under the influence of mescaline is closely comparable to a genuine mystical experience. If he is right, the conclusions are alarming. End of quote. Zahner thinks that Huxley is not right, but I believe that it is Zahner who is mistaken. There are, of course, innumerable drug experiences that have no religious features, and they can be sensual as readily as spiritual, trivial as readily as transforming, capricious as readily as sacramental. If there is one point about which every student of psychoactivating agent agrees, it is that there is no such thing as the drug experience per se, no experience that the drugs, as it were, secrete. Every experience is a mix of three ingredients: drug, set, which is the psychological makeup of the individual, and setting, the social and physical environment in which it is taken. But given the right set and setting, the drugs can induce religious experiences that are indistinguishable from such experiences that occur spontaneously. Nor need the sets and settings be exceptional. The way the statistics are currently running, it looks as if from a fourth to a third of the general population will have religious experiences if they take certain drugs under naturalistic conditions, meaning conditions in which the researcher supports the subject but does not interfere with the direction that the experience is taking. Among subjects who have strong religious proclivities, the proportion of those who have religious experience jumps to 3/4. If such subjects take the drugs in religious settings, the percentage soars to 9 out of 10. How do we know that the experiences that these people have are really religious? We can begin with the fact that they say they are. The 1/4 to 1/3 of the general population figure is drawn from two sources. 10 months after they had their first experiences, 24% of the 194 subjects in a study by the California psychiatrist Oscar Janiger characterized their experiences as having been religious. 32% of the 74 subjects in Dittman and Heyman's study reported looking back on their LSD experience that it looked as if it had been very much or quite a bit religious. 42% checked as true the statement that they were left with a greater awareness of God or a higher power or ultimate reality. The statement that 3/4 of subjects having religious sets will have religious experiences comes from the reports of 69 religious professionals who took the drugs while the Harvard project was in progress. In the absence of a single definition of religious experience generally acceptable to psychologists of religions, b, foolproof ways of asserting whether actual experiences exemplify any definition. I'm not sure there is a better way of telling whether experiences of the 333 men and women involved in the above studies were religious than by their reports, than they seemed so to them. But if more rigorous methods were preferred, they exist, they have been utilized, and they confirm the conviction of the man in the street that drug experiences can indeed be religious. In his doctoral study at Harvard University, Walter Pahnke, P-A-H-N-K-E, worked out a topology of religious experience, in this instant mystical experience based on classical reports that Walter Stace, S-T-A-C-E, included in his Mysticism and Philosophy. Pahnke then administered psilocybin to 15 theology professors and students, half of the total population of 30, in the setting of a Good Friday service. The drug was given in a double-blind experiment, meaning that neither Dr. Pahnke nor his subjects knew which 15 were getting the psilocybin and which 15 received placebos to constitute a control group. Consequently, the subjects' reports of their experiences were rated independently by 3 former school teachers on the degree strong, moderate, slight, or none, to which each reported evinced the 9 traits of mystical experience that Stace enumerates. The results showed that those subjects who received the drug experienced phenomena which were indistinguishable from, if not identical with, the categories defined by our topology of mysticism. With the thought that the reader might like to rest his or her own powers of discernment on the question being considered, I insert here a simple test I gave to members of the Woodrow Wilson Society at Princeton University. I presented them with two accounts of religious experiences, one drug-occasioned and the other not, and I asked them to guess which was which. Okay, so these two experiences, they're a paragraph long each, and I'm going to read each paragraph. Okay, the first one. Suddenly, I burst into a vast, new, indescribably wonderful universe. Although I'm writing this over a year later, the thrill of the surprise and amazement, the awesomeness of the revelation, the engulfment in an overwhelming feeling wave of gratitude and blessed wonderment are as fresh, and the memory of the experience is as vivid as if it had happened 5 minutes ago. And yet, to concoct anything by way of description that would even hint at the magnitude and the sense of ultimate reality, this seems such an impossible task. The knowledge which has infused and affected every aspect of my life came instantaneously and with such complete force of certainty that it was impossible then or since to doubt its validity. And here's the second experience. All at once, without warning of any kind, I found myself wrapped in a flame-colored cloud. For an instant, I thought of fire. The next, I knew that the fire was within myself. Directly afterward, there came upon me a sense of exultation, of immense joyousness, accompanied immediately followed by an intellectual illumination impossible to describe. Among other things, I did not merely come to believe, but I saw that the universe is not composed of dead matter, but is, on the contrary, a living presence. I became conscious in myself of eternal life. I saw that all men are immortal, and not the cosmic are immortal, that the cosmic order is such that without any peradventure all things work together for the good of each and all, that the foundation principle of the world is what we call love, and that the happiness of each and all in the long run absolutely certain. On the occasion referred to, twice as many students, 46, answered incorrectly as answered correctly, 23. I buried the correct answer in an endnote to enable the reader to test himself on the questions if he wishes to do so. Why, in the face of this considerable evidence, does Zehner hold that drug experiences cannot be authentically religious? There appear to be 3 reasons. The first, his own experience was utterly trivial. This, of course, proves that not all drug experiences are religious, but not that none is. Excuse me. 2, he thinks the experiences of others that appear religious to them are not truly so. Zehner distinguishes 3 kinds of mysticism: natural mysticism, in which the soul is united with the natural world; monistic mysticism, in which the soul merges with an impersonal absolute; and theistic mysticism, in which the soul confronts the living personal God. He concedes that drugs can induce the first 2 species of mysticism, but not its supreme instance, the theistic. As proof, he analyzes Huxley's experience, recounted in The Doors of Perception, to show that it produced, at best, a blend of nature and monistic mysticism. Even if we were to accept Zehner's evaluation of the 3 forms of mysticisms, Huxley's case, and indeed Zehner's entire book, would prove only that not every mystical experience induced by drugs is theistic, insofar as Zehner goes beyond this to imply that drugs do not and cannot induce theistic mysticism, he not only goes beyond the evidence but proceeds in the face of it. James Stotkin reports that Peyote Indians see visions, which may be of Christ himself. Sometimes they hear the voice of the Great Spirit. Sometimes they become aware of the presence of God and of those personal shortcomings, which must be corrected if they are to do his will. And G.M. Carstairs, reporting on the use of Bhang, B-H-A-N-G, in India, quotes a Brahmin as saying, "It gives good bhakti," B-H-A-K-T-I, bhakti being precisely Hinduism's theistic way of relating to the divine. 3. There is a third reason why Zahler might doubt that drugs can induce genuinely mystical experiences. Zahner is a Roman Catholic, and Roman Catholic doctrine teaches that mystical rapture is a gift of grace, and as such can never be brought under human control. This may be true. Certainly the empirical evidence cited does not preclude the possibility of genuine ontological or theological difference between natural and drug-induced religious experiences. At this point, however, we're considering phenomenology rather than ontology, description rather than truth claims, and on this level, there is no difference. Descriptively, drug experiences cannot be distinguished from their natural religious counterparts. When the current philosophical authority on mysticism, W.T. Stace, S-T-A-C-E, was asked whether the drug experience is similar to the mystical experience, he answered, "It is not a matter of its being similar to mystical experience. It is mystical experience." What we seem to be witnessing in Zahner's mysticism, sacred and the profane, is a reenactment of the age-old pattern in the conflict between science and religion. Whenever a new controversy arises, religion's first impulse is to deny the disturbing evidence science has produced. Seen in perspective, Zahner's refusal to admit that drugs can induce experiences descriptively indistinguishable from spontaneous ones is a current counterpart of the 17th century theologian's initial refusal to accept the evidence for the Copernican revolution. When the fact that drugs can trigger religious experiences becomes incontrovertible, discussion will move to the more difficult question of how this fact is to be interpreted. That question leads beyond phenomenology and into philosophy. And I'm going to pause here. And this was the second section. The next section is called Drugs and Religion Viewed Philosophically. Until soon. Cleansing the Doors of Perception by Huston Smith. Chapter 2. Drugs and Religion Viewed Philosophically. Why do people reject evidence? Presumably because they find it threatening. Theologians are not the only professionals who can be defensive. In his Personal Knowledge, Michael Polanyi recounts the way the medical profession ignored such palpable facts as the painless amputation of human limbs performed before their very own eyes in hundreds of successive cases, concluding that the subjects were impostors who were either deluding their physicians or colluding with them. One physician, Esdale, carried out 300 major operations painlessly under mesmeric trance in India, but neither in India nor in Great Britain could he get medical journals to print accounts of his work. Polanyi attributes this closed-mindedness to lack of conceptual framework in which their discoveries could be separated from specious and untenable admixtures. The untenable admixture, in quotes, is the fact that psychotomimetic drugs, sorry, that's a hard word to say, can induce religious experiences in its apparent implication that religious disclosures are no more veridical than psychotic ones. For religious skeptics, this conclusion is of course not tenable at all. It fits perfectly with all their theses that all religion is at heart an escape from reality. Psychotics avoid reality by retiring into make-believe dream worlds. What better evidence could there be that religious visionaries do the same than the fact that their visions can be chemically induced as well? Marx appears to have been more than metaphorically accurate in proposing that religion is the opiate of the people, and Freud, too, was more right than he realized. He never doubted that religious phenomena are to be understood only on the model of neurotic symptoms of the individual. He should have said psychotic symptoms. So, the religious skeptic is likely to reason. What about the religious believer? Convinced that religious experiences are basically vertical, can he admit that psychoactive drugs can occasion them? To do so, he needs, in brackets, to return to Polanyi's words, a conceptual framework in which the discoveries can be separated from the species and untenable admixtures. The untenable admixture here being the conclusion that religious experiences are in general delusory. One way to effect the separation would be to argue that despite phenomenological similarities between natural and drug-induced religious experiences, they are separated by a crucial ontological difference. Crucial ontological difference. Sorry about that. He uses a lot of large words. Jeez. Anyway, continuing on now. Such an argument would follow the pattern of theologians who argue for the real presence of Christ's body and blood in the bread and wine of the Eucharist, despite their admonition that chemical analysis, confined as it is to the level of accidents rather than essence, would not disclose this presence. But this distinction will not appeal to many today, for it turns on an essence-accident metaphysics which is not widely accepted. Instead of a fighting rearguard action by insisting that if drug and non-drug religious experiences cannot be distinguished empirically, there must be some trans-empirical factor that distinguishes them and renders the drug experience profane. I wish to explore the possibility of validating drug-induced religious experiences on the grounds that they come up with the same basic claims about reality that religions always do. To begin with the weakest of all arguments, the argument from authority William James, whom I class among the religious for his sensibilities, did not discount his insights that occurred while his brain chemistry was altered. The paragraph in which he retrospectively evaluates his nitrous oxide experiences has become classic, and I quote it here for its pertinence to the point under consideration. Quote, "One conclusion was forced upon my mind at that time, and my impression of its truth has ever since remained unshakable. It is that our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. We may go through life without suspecting their existence, but apply the requisite stimulus, and at a touch, they are there in all their completeness, definite types of mentality which probably somewhere have their field of application and adaptation. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. How to regard them is the question, for they are so discontinuous with ordinary consciousness, yet they may determine attitudes, though they cannot furnish formulas, and open a region through which they fail to give a map. At any rate, they forbid a premature closing of our accounts with reality. Looking back on my own experience, they all converge toward a kind of insight to which I cannot help ascribing some metaphysical significance." End of quote. To this argument from authority, I add two arguments that try to provide something by way of reasons. Drug experiences that assume a religious cast tend to have fearful and or beatific features, and my hypotheses relate to these two features of the experience, beginning with the ominous fear of the Lord, awful, A-W-E-F-U-L-L, awful feature. I have already registered in the frontispiece of this book Gordon Wasson's account, W-A-S-S-O-N, Wasson's account, which being short, I re-enter here. Quote, "Ecstasy. In common parlance, ecstasy is fun, but ecstasy is not fun. Your very soul is seized and shaken until it tingles. After all, who will choose to feel undiluted awe? The unknowing vulgar abuse of the word, we must recapture its full and terrifying sense." End of quote. Emotionally, the drug experience can be like having 40-foot waves crash over you for several hours while you cling desperately to a life raft, which may be swept from under you at any moment. It seems quite possible that such an ordeal, like any experience of a close call, could awaken fundamental sentiments respecting life, death, and destiny, and trigger the no atheists in foxholes effect. Similarly, as the subject emerges from the ordeal and realizes that he will not be permanently insane as he had feared, he may experience waves of overwhelming relief and gratitude like those that patients recovering from critical illnesses frequently report. Here is one such report. Quote, "It happened on a day when my bed was pushed out of doors to the open gallery of the hospital. I cannot now recall whether the revelation came suddenly or gradually. I only remember finding myself in the very midst of those wonderful moments, beholding life for the first time in all its intoxication of loveliness, in its unspeakable joy, beauty, and importance. I cannot say what the mysterious change was. I saw no new thing, but I saw all the things in a miraculous new light, in what I believe is their true light. I saw for the first time how wildly beautiful and joyous, beyond any words of mine to describe, is the whole of life. Every human being moving across the porch, every sparrow that flew, every branch tossing in the wind, was caught in and was part of the whole mad ecstasy of loveliness, of joy, of importance, of intoxication of life. End of quote. If we do not discount religious intuitions because they are prompted by battlefields and physical crises, if we regard the latter as calling us to our senses more often than they reduce us into delusions, need comparable intuitions be discounted simply because the crises that trigger them are of an inner psychic variety? Wow, that's a good question. I'm going to read that again. If we do not discount religious intuitions because they are prompted by battlefields and physical crises, if we regard the latter as calling us to our senses more often than they seduce us into delusions, need comparable intuitions be discounted simply because the crises that trigger them are of an inner psychic variety. Turning from the fearful to the beatific aspects of the drug experience, some of the latter may be explainable by the hypotheses just stated. That is, they may be occasioned by the relief that attends the sense of escape from high danger, but this hypothesis cannot possibly account for all the blissful episodes that chemicals occasion, for the simple reason that the positive episodes often come first, or to persons who experience no negative episodes whatsoever. Dr. Sanford Unger of the National Institute of Mental Health reports that among his subjects, 50 to 60% will not manifest any real disturbance worthy of discussion, yet around 75% will have at least one episode in which exultation, rapture, and joy are the key descriptions. How are we to account for the drug's capacity to induce peak experiences such as the following, which are not preceded by fear? Open quote. A feeling of great peace and contentment seemed to flow through my entire body. All sound ceased. I seemed to be floating in a great, very, very still void or hemisphere. It is impossible to describe the overwhelming feeling of peace, contentment, and being part of goodness itself that I felt. I could feel my body dissolving and actually becoming part of a goodness and peace that was all around me. Words can't describe this. I feel an awe and wonder that such a feeling could have occurred to me. End of quote. Consider the following argument. Like every other form of life, human nature has become distinctive through specialization. Human beings have specialized in developing a cerebral cortex. The analytic powers of this instrument are a standing wonder, but the instrument seems less able to provide people with the sense that they are meaningfully related to their environment, to life, the world, and history in its wholeness. As Albert Camus describes the situation. Open quote. If I were a cat among animals, this life would have meaning, or rather this problem would not arise, for I should belong to this world. I would be this world to which I am now opposed by my whole consciousness. End of quote. Note that it is Camus' consciousness that opposes him to this world. The drugs do not knock this consciousness out, but while they leave it operative, they also activate areas of the brain that normally lie below the threshold of awareness. One of the clearest objective signs that the drugs are taking effect is the dilation they produce in the pupils of the eyes, and one of the most predictable subjective signs is the intensification of visual perception. Both these responses are controlled by portions of the brain that lie deep further to the rear than the mechanisms that govern consciousness. Meanwhile, we know that human organism is joined to its world in innumerable ways that our senses do not pick up through gravitational fields, bodily respiration, and the like. The list could be multiplied until the human skin begins to look more like a traffic maze than a boundary. Perhaps the deeper regions of the brain which evolved earlier and are more like those of the lower animals. Quote, "If I were a cat, I should belong to this world." End quote. Can sense this relatedness better than can the cerebral cortex, which now demands our attention. And if so, when the drugs rearrange the neurohumors that chemically transmit impulses across synapses between neurons, human consciousness and its submerged intuitive ecological awareness might for a spell become interlaced. This is, of course, no more than a hypothesis. But how else? But how else are we to account for the extraordinary incidents under the drugs of that kind of insight, the keynote of which James described as invariably a reconciliation? It is as if, he continues, I guess this is James, okay. It is as if the opposites of the world, whose contradictoriness and conflict make all our difficulties and troubles, were melted into one and the same genus. But one of the species, the nobler and better one, is itself the genus, and so soaks up and absorbs its opposites into itself. And now there's another section here that is entitled Drugs and Religion Viewed Religiously. Suppose that drugs can induce experiences indistinguishable from religious experiences, and that we can respect these reports. Do they shed any light, I now ask, not on life, but on the nature of the religious life? One thing they may do is throw religious experience itself into a perspective by clarifying its relation to the religious life as a whole. Drugs appear to be able to induce religious experiences. It is less evident that they can produce religious lives. It follows that religion is more than a string of experiences. This is hardly news, but it may be a useful reminder, especially to those who incline toward the religion of religious experience, which is to say, towards lives bent on the acquisition of desired states of experience, irrespective of their relation to life's other demands and components. Despite the dangers of the faculty psychology, in quotes, faculty psychology, that was in vogue in the first half of the century, it remains useful to regard human beings as having minds, wills, and feelings. One of the lessons of religious history is that to be adequate, a faith must activate all three components of human nature. Overly rationalistic overly rationalistic religions grow arid, and moralistic ones grow leaden. Those that emphasize experience have their comparable pitfalls, as evidenced by Taoism's struggle, not always successful, to keep from degenerating into quietism, and the vehemence with which Zen Buddhism insists that once students have attained Satori, they must be driven out of it and back into the world. The case of Zen is especially pertinent here, for it pivots on an enlightenment experience. Satori or Kensho, Satori or Kensho, Kensho, which some but not all Zen Buddhists say resembles the LSD experience. Alike or different, the point is that Zen recognizes that unless the experience is joined to discipline, it will come to naught. Quote, even the Buddha continued to sit. Without joriki, Joriki, the particular power developed through zazen, which is seated meditation, the vision of oneness attained in enlightenment in time becomes clouded and eventually fades into a pleasant memory instead of remaining an omnipresent reality shaping our daily life. To be able to live in accordance with what the mind's eye has revealed through Satori requires, like the purification of character and the development of personality, a ripening period of zazen. End of quote. If the religion of religious experience is a snare and a delusion, it follows that no religion that fixes its faith primarily in substances that induce a religious experience can be expected to come to a good end. What promised to be a shortcut will prove to be a short circuit. What began as a religion will end up as a religious surrogate. Whether chemical substances can be helpful adjuncts to faith is another question. The Ph.D. using Native American Church seems to indicate that they can be. Anthropologists give this church a good report, noting among other things that its members resist alcohol better than do non-members. The conclusion to which evidence seems currently to point is that it is indeed possible for chemicals to enhance the religious life, but only when they are set within the context of faith, open bracket, conviction that what they disclose is true. Okay, so faith is conviction that what they disclose is true. Okay, I'm going to start the sentence again. The conclusion to which the evidence seems currently to point is that it is indeed possible for chemicals to enhance the religious life, but only when they are set within the context of faith and discipline. And after discipline, in brackets, it says, exercise of the will toward fulfilling what the disclosures ask of us. Nowhere today in Western civilization are both these conditions met. Faith has declined in churches and synagogues, and the counterculture lacks discipline. This might lead us to forget about the drugs, were it not for the fact that the distinctive religious emotion and the one that drugs can unquestionably occasion, autos mysterium tremendum, majestas mysterium fascinans. In a phrase, the phenomenon of religious awe seems to be declining sharply. As Paul Tillich said in an address to the Hillel Society at Harvard several years ago, quote, the question our century puts before us is it possible to regain the lost dimension, the encounter with the holy, the dimension that cuts through the world of subjectivity and objectivity, and goes down to that which is not world, but which is the mystery of the ground of being. End of quote. Tillich may be right. This may be the religious question of our century. For if, as I have argued, religion cannot be equated with religious experience, neither can it long survive their absence. And that concludes Chapter 2. Chapter 3 is called Psychedelic Theophanies and the Religious Life. Well, I hope you're enjoying this. I'm finding it very interesting. I must apologize for my mispronunciations and my stumblings. I mean, a lot of these words are huge. So, but I will try to continue. So please like and subscribe. And till soon.